Drums. Now, the drum kit is probably one of the hardest instruments for any sound engineer to record because there are so many different types of instruments that create this one instrument, and also there are hundreds of different techniques out there to record this instrument, so it can become quite overwhelming. Today I'm going to look at a few different overhead miking techniques to capture the overall sound of a kit, and to do so I'm going to use two pencil condensers made by Aston microphones. They're called the Starlight pencil condensers. Really cool. I do have a video on a feature that these microphones had, which is kind of groovy. So if you want, you can check that out. But for now, overheads. Let's get to it. So the first technique we are going to look at is the X and Y technique, also called the coincident pair. This technique gets its name, as you can pretty much see, from the shape formed between the two microphones. And something to bear in mind if we are sitting or looking at it from a drummer's perspective, so sitting behind the drum kit looking out, if you look up, the overhead on the left will be picking up the right hand side of the drum kit, and the overhead on the right will be picking up the left hand side of the drum kit. And that's quite important to remember for when you're during mixdown for your panning options. It's also characterized by the fact that it's between the angle between the microphones is from 90 to 135, and if you play around with this, it'll just increase or decrease its stereo field. I'm not too sure why you don't go less than 90 or more than 135. Perhaps the stereo-ness of the setup becomes redundant. I'm not too sure. So if anybody does know, please let me know. Right, some characteristics about this technique. It is good for mono compatibility. That's a strong point. Because the capsules of the microphone are so close together, it pretty much picks up the whole kit. Both microphones pick up the whole kit at exactly the same time, no matter where you're playing on the kit. You know, the snare, the kick, the tom, even though they spread out, the sounds are going to hit the mics at almost exactly the same time. So it's extremely mono compatible, which is great. What else is there? Oh, I got my notes here. Okay, it's got a pretty small stereo field, and that's also quite important to know. If you're looking for a very wide, bombastic drum kit, this is probably not the right choice as an overhead. But yes, it's got a small stereo field, but that does mean that it's going to be a nice and tight and punchy drum sound, which is really, really cool. So for example, I mainly use X and Y technique in my room, and I have my overheads really low down, and that is to try and whittle out the room that I'm practicing in, because it's a pretty crappy room when I record. So that's another point, is the height of the overheads does make a huge impact. If you can imagine, this is the drum kit, beautifully illustrated, I know, and your overheads are all the way up here. They're going to be pointing out of the boundaries of the drum kit, and therefore you're going to get a lot more room. The lower down you come, you're going to be picking up more and more drum kit, and you'll eventually get to a point where you'll drastically increase the stereo spread of the drum kit. If I can try and explain this, if you get really low, incredibly low, like to the point where it's not useful because the drummer won't be able to play, if you can imagine the left-hand microphone will be picking up the floor tom. The floor tom will be on axis to the left-hand microphone, yet it'll be really off axis to the right-hand microphone, and vice versa. The right-hand microphone will pick up, if it's down here, will be on axis to the snare drum, but the snare drum will be incredibly off axis to the left-hand microphone. So therefore, when you pan them, you're going to get this huge stereo spread. But that's unrealistically low. No one's going to play with overheads all the way down here. You know, they're probably going to be up here. So therefore, the stereo field gets a lot smaller, but it becomes nice, tight, and punchy. I think that's it, eh? So X and Y, really great technique, very widely used, a good punchy sound. If you're looking for a bombastic drum sound, I would recommend using this alongside a matched pair or something like that, where you create a huge stereo field. Awesome. So we've got our overhead set up. This is in the X and Y technique. They set up roughly in the middle of the drum kit, and if we come to the side, it's also pretty much down the center of the kit. What's cool about using these microphones is because they've got lasers in them, I can actually show you where each one is pointing, and the first one's down there on the ride, and the second one is just off the edge of the hi-hat. I haven't really tried to position them perfectly or to some sort of exact place. I just put them up. Unfortunately, I don't have a big proper boom stand like you'll find in a big recording studio, so I'm kind of maxed out on my height. I can elevate it up a bit, but then it becomes quite tricky to angle them down, and I've even had to use a good old dumbbell to stop the stand from falling over. But let's put this camera down, play something, and we can hear how it sounds. Yeah, it's roughly about a meter from the snare drum. But yeah, let's see how this sounds. So that there's pretty much the overheads as where they are now. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drop them a bit and really emphasize to see if we can get a really unrealistic stereo spread. Well, unrealistic to play because I'm going to really drop it down, but I want to see how that sounds in terms of spreading out the instruments. Cool, so this is now with the instruments, the microphones dropped quite low. As you can see, they're almost between the cymbals. Not realistic to play at all, but I want to hear how it pans, if there's a huge amount of separation in the way it pans or not, the stereo image. So that's going to be quite cool to hear. Let's go for it. Hopefully I don't hit my microphones. Nice. Now, what I want to mess around with, and this might take quite a while to set up, is I'm going to take them back to the height that they were at. But I'm going to bring them in a bit. So at the moment they're at roughly 90 degrees. And I'm going to try and bring them in and see what happens, and then take them way out and see what happens there. So, let's go. Cool. So, let's have a look. Right. They are, I don't even know what that is, probably at about 50 or 60 degrees angled apart. Roughly the same sort of height as the first setup. Yeah, let's see how this stereo image, the spread, sounds. Nice. Now, time to take them extremely wide apart. This might be a bit tricky with this stand or the clamp, but I'll see what I can do. Nice. So, if we have a look now, they're at roughly, 110, 120 degrees. So that should theoretically give us a bit of a wider image, but it's all in the testing of this, eh? So let me put this down and give it a bash. And that's a wrap for the X and Y technique. Again, I apologize for the condition of my drum kit. I've actually tried to order new cymbals, but with the lockdown, it's not an essential item, so they refuse to send them. So that's a battle of my own. Apparently got to get a police affidavit and stuff like that, but we'll see. So I apologize for the condition of my kit, but I really hope that you guys can hear the different changes in the stereo field based on the angle between the mics and also to some degree the height. Rad. The spaced pair microphone technique, also known as the AB technique, very common, extremely common in live situations and in studio. Basically what it is it's two identical microphones that are a distance apart from each other. The distance can be from pretty much on top of each other to whatever you want. Bear in mind that the closer they are, the less stereo field you're going to get, because the sounds are going to be arriving at both microphones at the same time. So you kind of want some space between them. Common way is literally you put the left one to capture the left side of the kit and the right one to capture the right side of the kit. But very important, this technique always has phase issues. You can't get away from it, and that is because, for example, if they are a certain height from above the kit, for example, if you play the snare drum, that snare sound is going to hit this microphone before it hits this microphone. And on the other side, this tom will hit this microphone before it hits this microphone. So there's always going to be some part of the drum kit that's out of phase. So what engineers will generally do is they'll make it equidistant from the instrument that they want to be in phase. Generally, that'll be the snare drum. So you get a piece of string, you can get a microphone cable, a piece of rope, whatever, and measure the distance from the snare to the first mic, and then make it equidistant to the second mic. And therefore, you know wherever you're measuring from will be perfectly in phase when they combine together. This technique is not really good for mono compatibility because it always has phasing issues. But because of that, it's really, really good at creating a huge stereo field. If pan hard left and hard right. This is a great technique if you're wanting to have those drum fills or tom fills that move around your head like this. So that can be really, really cool, and one of the plus sides of this technique. So I would, if I was had a lot of microphones at my disposal, use this technique alongside maybe a mono overhead or X and Y technique, something that's nice, tight and punchy. And this will just create a lot of space and width to the drum kit and make it sound bombastic and out of this world. Anything else? It's of course got many options for placement, because you can move the microphones around. You can angle them in, point them in, put them pretty much wherever you want. I've actually done it where I've put it about 3-4 meters in front of the drum kit, pointed at the drum kit, almost like a room mic, a directional room mic, and I got a pretty damn cool result. So you can mess around with this, but just keep in mind the phasing issues, that there will always be some element of the kit that will be out of phase. So you got to choose what you want to be in phase. And that about sums it up for the space pair. Sweet! So I've chosen that I want the snare to be in phase. Therefore, I've taken a lead or a microphone cable and I measured from the center of the snare up to the first mic and then made sure that that's equidistant to the second mic. So I know that the sound from the snare will be hitting the mics at exactly the same time. So the snare should be in phase. Again, it's about 1 meter above the drum kit and pretty much looking down the middle of the kit. So yeah, let's see how this sounds. Can I also just say that these mics at the moment are pretty close together. You'd normally have them for a space pair, you'd normally stretch them out, but I'm wanting to test extremes here. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go, actually before that, let's drop them and see what that sounds like. It's going to become really unrealistic for playing, but in terms of miking up a sound source, let's see what happens. The closer you get, how does it affect the stereo field? Theoretically, it should spread it. So let's see what happens. Nice. So as you can see, what I've done is lowered the mics drastically. Now this is a bit unrealistic in terms of playing, but it's going to be cool to see how it sounds. I've also, because I wanted them to be angled at the snare, I've actually angled them in a little bit, so that they're pointing more at the snare, whereas when I brought them straight down, they were a bit close to the toms. So we're going to see how this sounds and go from there. I'm actually quite interested to hear how this sounds, because we might get some really weird cone filtering or like funny phase issues in the higher frequencies between the cymbals. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Now let's pull out another microphone stand and raise them back up to their height and pull them apart. Sweet! Nice. That did take quite a while. So what I've done is I've spaced them apart to show you the sort of distance. There we go. And to show you where they're pointing, it might seem a bit weird, but I've gone with an idea that if we break the kit into two, I want the left hand side to be getting the hi-hat, snare, high tom and left crash, and then the right hand microphone to be getting the medium and floor tom, ride and other crash. So I've got the lasers on and the microphone's pointing right in the middle and it's actually hitting the floor. I don't know if you can see it there, that dot there. So that's where the microphone's pointing, which is essentially through this gap here. So it's in the middle of this side of the kit. Same thing on this side. This guy is pointing right in the middle there, and he's hitting the floor down there, that laser. So that's how wide they are apart. They do seem a bit angled, I know, and very important, they are equidistant to the snare drum. That's why the right hand side one is lower than the left hand side one. But let's see how it sounds. Nice. So they're two examples. I'm actually going to do a third one, and it's going to be very weird. I'm going to put the mics outside the kit, facing in. Let's see what happens. This is experimenting, you know. Wicked. Just to show you how the mics have been set up. This one, this one's literally chilling between the hanging plants, pointing at the snare drum. I've got both of them pointing at the snares, you can see by the laser, and this one's out here on the right hand side. There you go. So theoretically this should give us quite a wide stereo image. It's going to be interesting to see how this sounds, because I've seen quite a lot of live sound engineers doing this. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't know, but they do it. Maybe it's just ease of space and stuff like that, especially when drums are on drum risers. I don't know. Nice. So that pretty much brings us to the end of match pair or A/B technique. Again, it's going to be interesting to see, and sitting down and actually listening to them how they sound. But this is a very common technique. I've seen it used hugely in live and in studio because it creates such a wide stereo field. Although there are nearly always phasing issues. Well, there will always be phasing issues, so you've got to choose which part of the kit you want to be in phase. For this example here, I've chosen to make them equidistant from the snare. So just bear that in mind. Measure from the sound source that you want to stay in phase. Make sure that both microphones are the same distance. So this next one is a new technique for me. I've never tried this technique. It is the ORTF technique, and it stands for that. I don't know if you can see it. I don't speak French. It's like Office de Radiodiffusion Télévision. Yeah, basically it became Radio France. So it was a technique developed by Radio France. This technique makes use of the two microphones facing away from each other, but the numbers are quite critical. So they are at an angle of 110 degrees, and the capsules are 17 centimeters apart from each other. Again, I haven't done this, so I don't know much about it, but I will be doing it. So we will soon hear what it sounds like. Something important to remember is that if it is too close to the drum kit, you'll get a hole in your center image, essentially right there. If you can imagine, that's the on axis of the microphone, and if the lower down you go, so the instrument comes closer and closer into this gap here, it's going to be in the dead zones of the microphone off axis, so they won't be picking up the sound properly. So that is something to remember and keep in mind if you're wanting to use this technique, is that you must pull the microphones back a bit away from the drum kit. It will also have some phasing issues, quite small phasing issues, because the capsules are not really close together, because they're 17 centimeters apart. No matter what you do, the sound is going to reach the one microphone before it does the other, unless it's equidistant. So again, you'll choose a part of the drum kit, probably the snare, and make that equidistant to both capsules. And that'll mitigate the phasing issue of that chosen instrument, in this case the snare drum, or kick. Some people do kick, some people find a midpoint between kick and snare, best of both worlds, but there'll always be a part of the kit that'll be out of phase. The phasing issues for this will be less than for a stereo pair or matched pair of overheads. Yeah, so this is quite a cool technique, and I'm quite excited to test it out. It's something new for me, and I hope I can get it right. I'm going to have to get some measuring device to get the 117 degrees spot on. And also something else is that this technique was designed to mimic our ears. I don't know whose head is is that roughly 17 centimeters? I don't know. But yeah, let's see how it sounds, and if you like it or don't like it, let me know. It's going to be quite interesting to find out. Cool, guys. Unfortunately, I can't get the height, so we're probably going to have quite a dead spot in the stereo image in the middle. But having said that, that could actually work really well with another overhead technique, like a mono overhead or a very tight X and Y, where these guys will take up the far perimeters of the stereo field, and the X and Y technique or the mono technique will fill up the center. So that could be quite cool. But let's give it a bash and see how it sounds. Also, just speaking about this technique, I'm not going to try and do any other sort of heights, because I already can't get the perfect scenario because my boom tower is too small. So I'm going to leave it like this, and yeah, it's an interesting one for me. I've never done this one before, so it's going to be cool to see how it sounds. The mid-side technique. This is a really, really cool technique. I've actually never tried it on drums. I've done it on acoustic guitar, and it's had some really rad results. So what you need for this technique is... what's also quite cool about this is you don't need a matched pair of microphones. But what is important is that one of the microphones needs to be able to function in the figure of 8 mode. So what you need is a cardioid microphone and a figure 8 microphone. They can be the same type of microphone or what I'm going to do is a pencil condenser and then a large diaphragm that can be switched into the figure of 8 pattern. And the way you set it up is the cardioid microphone will be pointing directly at the drum kit above it, and the figure 8 microphone will be pointing essentially to the sides like that. So as you can see that the figure 8 will be like that. So the microphone will be on its side and the cardioid will be like this. You'll see it in the video when I set it up. Now the cool thing about this technique is that it has perfect mono compatibility, and that is because of the way you actually get the sound. So when you put it into your DAW or your audio workstation, whatever you're using, well, there are various ways of doing this, but the main way to do it in the DAW, in the software, is you pan the cardioid microphone center, then the figure of 8 microphone, you duplicate the track, pan one hard left, the other hard right, and one of them will be phase inverted. So those duplicated tracks, the one is normal and the one is out of phase to that other one. And what this does is creates a huge stereo field, but if you play it back in mono, the left and the right channels cancel out and you're left with just the cardioid microphone in the middle. So therefore also it's got perfect mono compatibility, which is really, really cool. Some things to note is you'll obviously group the figure of 8 microphone, the two channels, and the louder they are, the louder or the wider the stereo spread sounds, because you're now bringing that effect louder, more to the front of the mix. So the wider the drum kit will sound, the louder you make those two channels, those two figure of 8 channels. Another way of doing this is to create a Y cable, which takes the signal from the figure of 8 microphone and you actually hardwire it. So it takes the signal and then splits into two XLRs, and those go into their own inputs, and then the one is phase inverted, and then you won't have to do it in the DAW in your audio workstation. So that's another way of doing it. I don't have a Y cable, so I'll do it in post or after I've recorded. Let's see, what else have I left out? Oh yeah, the one downside to this, as you can see here, because the figure of 8 microphone doesn't actually point at the drum kit, it points to the sides. It doesn't pick up the drum kit. It doesn't have an on-axis sound. It picks up mainly the room or off-axis. So, and that's what essentially gives this technique its feeling and its tone. So that's why it works really nicely for acoustic guitar as well. So this is a really rad technique. I'm looking forward to testing it. It's pretty simple, but again, you need a figure of 8 microphone or a microphone that has that functionality in order to achieve this. So yeah, let's see what it sounds like. The pencil condenser that we have here, that is set in cardioid, and it's pointing straight down into the center of the kit. The large diaphragm condenser is set to figure of 8, and if you can imagine, its polar pattern is like that. So in other words, it's facing sideways. So it's going to pick up the sides, mainly room, just bear that in mind. Whereas the pencil condenser is going to pick up the drum kit. What's cool about this is that it has really good mono compatibility. Yeah, let's see how this sounds, or hear how this sounds. Nice. So that's an example of MS technique. Unfortunately, I can't mess around too much with height because my boom's already at the maximum height, so that is a downside. But it's going to be really cool to see how it sounds, hear how it sounds. I've actually been wanting to do this technique for quite a while in this tiny room. So, yeah, but that's something to bear in mind because the figure of 8 microphone is picking up, it's very off axis. It's like 100% off axis to the drums. So it's only picking up room essentially. You must just bear that in mind. My room doesn't sound that great, but it does sound, it has its own sound. So I want to hear what that sounds like in this technique. So I'm quite looking forward to that. The Recorderman technique. This is a technique that I've never tried before, so it's going to be quite exciting for me to hear how it sounds. I imagine it's pretty similar to the Glyn Jones technique. The only difference really being is that Glyn Jones technique is seen as a technique that is used in association with a kick and a snare drum close mic, whereas this is a standalone, if that makes sense. Essentially, it's hard for me to draw it, but what it entails is the one microphone is directly over the snare drum, and the other one is pointed at the snare, but from behind the drummer over his shoulder. If it's a right-handed drummer, so that means the toms, if you're sitting down, the toms spill out to the right. The microphone will be over his right-hand shoulder pointing at the snare. If it's a left-hand drummer, so he's playing like this, the toms spill out to the left. The microphone, the second microphone, will be over his left shoulder pointing directly at the snare. Again, to make sure that there aren't phase issues, both microphones are equidistant from the snare drum. Again though, because these microphones aren't right next to each other, there will be a certain elements of the kit that will be out of phase. And that's just the nature of the beast, because the floor tom's going to be closer to the one microphone than it is to the other one, or something's always going to be not equidistant from the sound source. Something important to know, my one fact here is that if you pan it hard left and hard right, you can have a fallout in your stereo image. So that is just something to bear in mind. So mess around with panning to make sure the drums stay sounding like a drum kit, not like a whole bunch of instruments that are thrown into the atmosphere. So I'm quite excited to try this one because I've never tried it, but I have tried the Glyn Jones technique and I really enjoyed that. So stay tuned. Over the drummer's shoulder, pointing directly at the snare drum. Both these microphones need to be equidistant from the snare drum. So cool. Let's see how it sounds. Let's hear how it sounds. To end off, I just want to mention a few things about recording drums with overheads. Most of the time it's something that you will do, obviously use overheads. But just some things to remember are, firstly, you need to ask yourself, are you wanting to capture the drum kit as a whole, or are you just wanting to capture the cymbals? Because that's going to change where you place your mics quite drastically. If you're wanting to capture the kit as a whole, you must just be careful for heavy hitting drummers that really lay into their cymbals, because the cymbal wash can completely destroy the rest of the kit in terms of what the overheads are capturing. So placement can become quite critical when you're wanting to capture it as a whole. I know for heavy metal, very often they just want the overheads to pick up the cymbals, and then rely on the close mics as the main sort of sound, and then a bit of room or whatever. But the overheads are mainly cymbal mics, so they'll be placed more over the cymbals than trying to capture the kit as a whole. So ask yourself, what is the purpose? Is it to capture the whole kit, or is it to capture the cymbals? And the second thing is your choice of microphone. Now, there are primarily 3 types of microphones that you could use as overheads: pencil condensers, large diaphragm condensers, and then ribbon microphones if you're lucky enough to have them. The old ribbon microphones can be quite fragile, so just bear that in mind. If it's a hard hitter, you don't want to be too close to the kit because you can rip the capsule. So that bear that in mind. Is it called the capsule in ribbon? The filament. I don't know what it's called in the ribbon microphone. So bear that in mind. One of the pros of a pencil condenser as opposed to a large diaphragm condenser in use for overheads is because it's a smaller capsule, diaphragm, that's the word. Because it's a smaller diaphragm, it'll have a quicker transient response than a larger diaphragm, because literally the sound emanating from the drum kit, when it hits that diaphragm, less energy is needed to move that diaphragm as opposed to a large diaphragm condenser. So therefore it'll have a quicker transient response. So there should be more attack on a pencil condenser microphone. Another pro is that if you're in a bad sounding room, because pencil condensers don't pick up as much as large diaphragm condensers, they're more directional, that can play to your favor. So I use them as overheads because I don't really want to pick up the rest of the room. I just want to pick up the drum kit, and because they're way more directional, a pencil condenser works in my favor. Also, another favorable mention is recording in mono. Just using a single overhead can work absolute wonders, or using it in conjunction with a stereo pair, and that's something that you guys should try. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. It was really cool for me to do because I've never sat down and done ABs like this between the different techniques, and some of the techniques I've never even tried before. So that was really, really cool. I guess my next step is I need to get a matched pair of large diaphragm condensers, but until then, I'll just keep using the pencil condensers. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, share it, let everyone know, hit that subscribe button, and yeah, thanks so much, guys. Cheers,